Playing at Business with Steve Reece, the business podcast with a sense of fun. To find out more, go to playingatbusiness.com.
Hello, and welcome to episode 7 of the Playing at Business podcast, with me, your host, Steve Reece. Today we're looking at themes for toys. So, it seems like nowadays every few years we discover a new theme for toys, but I've found that so often it's all been done before. So we're going to look at some of these themes in this episode of the podcast. Clearly toys need to be about something, maybe a movie, maybe a cartoon, or even something else. But there generally needs to be character and personality to make the toys interesting, otherwise, it's kind of a lump of plastic. If you take a lump of plastic with some functionality, maybe that would work for preschool toys, where the needs of the child are more basic. But as kids get older, they tend to need characters and a setting or a universe, I guess you might call it, to immerse themselves in. In my experience, themes have never been more important because kids have less and less actual physical freedom today. But they do have, in most cases, probably more digital freedom than is good for them. And parents are constantly fighting a battle against excessive screen time nowadays. So my experience over time is that parents have become more and more likely to encourage play with toys for their children. More so than ever, toys are seen as an antidote to that kind of ruinous screen time. So I'm sometimes asked, having worked in toys for rather a long time, being a bit long in the tooth and grey of hair, what's the formula to fail in toys? Because I've seen many people be very successful, but I've probably seen 10 or 100 times more people be unsuccessful. And if I had to come up with one particular reason or one major factor for those massive failures, oftentimes it's because somebody thinks they've created something that's never been done before. And in fairness, humankind needs to progress. There's no doubt about that. And toys, like anything else, need to evolve. But at this point in time, if someone thinks they've really created something that's never been done before or seen before or nothing like it, normally that's when my my warning signs start to flash. And that's when my advice tends to turn towards, have you actually considered something more proven? The reality is, if you want to create art, that's fine. In fact, it's beyond fine. It's brilliant. I see people posting things all the time on social media in our world, in our category of toys and games, and some of them make me go wow, but they don't make me go wow, that's going to sell a lot. They make me go wow, that's creatively, aesthetically beautiful or different. Truly is creative, but it's not necessarily going to sell. And as a vulgar commercial soul, a glorified salesperson and a less glorified marketer, that's important to me. And I think the reality is that my observation would be, I first researched toys with kids in 1998, if my memory serves me right. So that's 20 years ago to date. And I've seen various changes in that time, from the licenses, the trends in licenses, the trends in movies. Obviously the technology, content consumption has utterly changed in terms of the structure, the format and the platforms. But the reality is, the way that a child plays has not changed that much. The actual need states of a child have not changed that much. The developmental stages of children at each age have not changed that much. Maybe over time there's been a move towards turning off from toys a little bit earlier, although I think that's often overstated. But typically, classically, we talk about kids starting to move on from toys at the age of about 7 or 8. Frankly, in the 20 years I've been doing it, I've not seen that much change, although I'm obviously aware of the kids growing older, younger thing. So the reality is, in all that time, the themes that work for kids have not changed that much. Okay, despite all this new technology and everything that's happening in the world in terms of change in 20 years, the themes that actually work for commercially successful toys are not that different from when they were when I first started in toys, but also B, when I was a child myself back in the 80s. In fact, as part of the research for this podcast, I was looking at old toy catalogues from the 1980s, and I found one for Argos, which is the one of the leading UK retailers, and has been a major toy player for all my life for sure. And interestingly, the big features in there that I could find were features for Transformers toys, features for Star Wars toys, and actually not that much had really changed. There was the odd brand or license which is no longer so strong, or perhaps has faded away a little bit. Interestingly, one of them was a Tomy brand called Zoids, which I remember well because I had the video game as well as the toys when I was a child myself. Who knows? Maybe that's something that could come back. But actually, in the end, the themes are still the same. Star Wars is the same theme now as it was then. Transformers is the same theme as it was then. So there are some proven toy themes. You don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. And the number one thing I would say to people is, if you are reinventing the wheel when it comes to the theme for your toy, in my experience, you're far more likely to fail than you are to succeed. So just to run through some of those proven toy themes, I mean, some of these should be very obvious to toy people, but Dinosaurs is a classic. You'll also note how they come back every few years, especially when there's a new installment of the Jurassic movie series or Godzilla. You also find that it's not just the movie licensed dinosaur toys, but generic dinosaur toys become big again during those times. And I think the thing is that you have to note that there are different types of dinosaur characters, which is a good point. It's not just about a theme with one type of thing. There tends to be a spread of different types of characters to ensure that different types of kids have something that appeals to them. So the classic thing with Godzilla, which I just mentioned, would be Godzilla and Godzuki. If you don't know the Godzilla franchise, it's basically set on a Japanese old movie series. There's a massive dinosaur, which is kind of very destructive, but also not entirely bad at the same time. And at least in the cartoon, there was a cuter, much softer, smaller, I guess baby or young kid dinosaur. And that's a fairly typical thing that you'll find in most themes. There'll be a spread of different types of characters. Another one, kind of coming on from dinosaurs, monsters. Monsters has been big many times. It's come and gone, and then it always comes back again. Moshi Monsters, probably a huge example in comparatively recent history. Hugely successful, and there's a digital world behind that and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is, it's still monsters that kids are playing with. You would have found kids playing with monsters, 30 years ago. Same thing. Zombies always generally strong, but goes away and comes back. You'll find different types of zombies. Ponies. Obviously there's one major pony toy brand in My Little Pony, but there are others as well. And it's perennial. It just keeps coming back. There are certain things about these categories, about these themes, that children love, and it's not just today's children. The children of every year tend to love these things. Unicorns, at the time of recording, is a big hot thing. We've seen that before. Obviously, the classic thing in terms of movies, big movies, is good versus bad, or superheroes versus supervillains. You've got the Marvel thing, you've got Star Wars, etc. Again, perennial. Princesses, okay, we're kind of in a sense we're post-gender labeling, but traditionally that was part of the girls' toy thing. Whether that's still relevant or not is debatable. But it's definitely been a proven theme, and Disney princesses toys still sell in great quantities through retail. So I guess there is still appeal for that, even if it's there's maybe questions of political correctness and labeling and all that kind of stuff. The animal universe in general, you could pick nearly any type of animal. Not every type. I've seen some products and movies that have failed with certain types of things. It's a little bit harder with birds, in my experience. Angry Birds is obviously a huge exception to that rule. But there's not been that many other toy brands which have done brilliantly well with birds. I've rarely seen snails work. I've seen a few examples of that. So again, even there are proven things. If you think about the way that kids play and how simply younger children especially see the world, a big fierce character, a cuter character, a sassy one. It's all that kind of standard stuff. But it's also the play patterns. Every few years yo-yos come back. Typically it's every 3 to 5 years. Yo-yos are going to be big again this year. And the reality is there is a reason for that, and that's because people often forget, we're in toys, which means our target consumer primarily, not in every case, but primarily we're targeting children. Children move through the stages of development and the stages of toys very quickly. If you're selling tea bags, I'm probably drinking the same brand of tea that I drank 20 years ago. I'll probably be drinking the same one in 20 years time. Almost I'm a customer for life. In toys, the customer's going to come and go every 3 years, which means that every 3 years, roughly, obviously, if you think that a third of your audience moves on every 3 years, if you leave it 3 years before you bring something back, the original audience is onto whatever the next thing is in terms of the next age categories up. So you can start again, and that's why every few years Yo-Yos comes back, because it's a proven thing. We all know it's great fun, and it comes back to a completely new consumer base. And it's the same with all these themes, and that's why they keep coming back time and time again. So to all my my creative listeners out there who are thinking, well, this guy's just trying to kill creativity, that's not the case at all, actually. And sometimes the best creativity that I've seen, though, in a commercial world like we live in, we still have to justify tooling costs. We still need to, make enough profit to pay the bills. Actually, it's innovating around a known formula. So just to use a few examples to put that into more, I guess, pictorial terms, Shopkins would be a classic example. Hugely successful toy brand, and effectively you could argue what it does is to take everyday shopping items that kids would see going around the shops with their parents, and it makes them characterized and collectible. The shopping play has been around since at least when I was a kid. I remember baskets full of small kind of items you might buy in the shop, but they tended to be more realism based. They weren't character based. So effectively, Shopkins has innovated around a known formula and mashed up a couple of things, and become therefore a massive global success. So I guess the thing is, for creative people in this industry, would you rather be the creative who originated such an amazing hit as Shopkins, or someone does something that's like totally wow, but which never gets on the shelf and therefore never gets into the hands of enough kids? Personally, I'd prefer the former to the latter. So another example of a kind of a genre of play is surprise. So obviously the surprise element isn't new. Kinder and Ferrero have been doing this hugely successfully, combining a surprise toy inside a chocolate egg outer for decades, certainly since I was a child. Less so in the USA. For people who are listening there might be thinking, what's this guy talking about? But they have started there, so you're gonna see those, I think. And they've been successful with that for decades. The Hatchlings and the LOL Surprise, which have been huge hits of the last couple of years, really that's an evolution of that surprise formula. These brands didn't invent surprise. They weren't trying to create something completely from scratch, but they just stretched it and innovated well, whilst combining it and mashing it up with, I guess what's now the 21st century marketing model for toys, unboxing. And lo and behold, a huge success results. Again, another example would be projectile toys. When I joined Hasbro nearly 20 years ago, Nerf was largely known as what we would call in the UK an American football brand. US football, gridiron, big guys, helmets, pads, everything smashing into each other. Not a mass market thing in Europe. In fairness, cult following and a kind of some real enthusiasts, but not enough to make it a big mass market thing. So over time, Nerf evolved, and fast forward to today, and it's a $1 billion plus projectile toy brand. It's just a hugely successful brand. Very, very strong position in the category that it's in. But the reality is, projectile toys have existed for a very long time. I remember a Batman licensed toy, a motorbike when I was a child, which fired a projectile bullet when I was a kid, and that was the big cool feature. And it fired it so far and so fast that I'm not sure you would be able to get that one through QA nowadays, or safety testing. But it was great, and kind of similar kind of thing back in the day. So obviously Hasbro have done what they do, and they've innovated around a formula of things that fire projectiles, applied their industry-leading product development and brand building. Lo and behold, it's a huge success. So I know some creators will strongly disagree with me on this, and great. If so, that's great. Please keep trying to reinvent that wheel, and the very, 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 very small percentage of those kind of iterations or outputs that work will do great things, and that's great. But the hard commercial reality really is that toys aren't kind of rocket science. You don't need to be that groundbreaking. The formula or the formulae are tried and tested. So you just need to innovate around the known themes. Mash up a couple of different formulas, differentiate with branding and design, storyline, content, distribution, creative. Make sure that in the end you don't lose sight of the end experience for the child, the consumer. And really, to me, in the end, success in toys lies in doing similar things in a different and novel way. And don't forget that thing about having a new consumer every 3 years. They haven't seen what we've just done. Your retail buyers may have done, and maybe they're weary, but your end consumer hasn't. They're new every three years. So yeah, so that's that brings me to the end of today's podcast. Thanks for listening as ever. If you liked this, please leave a review. If you didn't like it, please feel free to reach out and tell me why, and we'll be happy to consider adapting the podcast. For more about the podcast itself, feel free to go to www.playingatbusiness.com. If you want to know what we do, or I do, for a day job, we work as consultants in the toy industry. We offer toy business consultancy, product representation and sourcing, and you can find more about that at www.kidsbrandinsight.com. That's www.kidsbrandinsight.com. Or just Google Steve Reece Toys and you'll find some kind of way to find out more. Feel free to drop us a line if we can help in any way. And thanks and bye.
Playing at Business with Steve Reece, the business podcast with a sense of fun. To find out more, go to playingatbusiness.com.